Good morning. My name is Katie Williams, and I am a junior here at Culverhouse, majoring in economics and finance. Today, we have a special guest and Culverhouse legend with us to continue with our Lowder Lecture Series presents our Legends virtual panel. Mr. Bruce Culpepper, retired U.S. Country Chair and President of Shell Oil Company, is originally from Fife, Alabama, and graduated from the University of Alabama in 1981 with a degree in Human Resources Management. Shortly after graduating, Mr. Culpepper began his 38-year career with Shell at the Norco Manufacturing Complex in Louisiana. He served in a number of leadership positions of increasing responsibility and scope, both internationally and in the United States. In April 2016, Mr. Culpepper rose to be the U.S. Country Chair and President and served in this position until December 2018. He is also a very engaged and loyal alumnus and is currently a member of the Culverhouse Board of Visitors and the University of Alabama President's Cabinet. Bruce and his wife, Marguerite, now live in Guntersville, Alabama. Mr. Culpepper, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. We are excited to have the opportunity to talk to you about your unique career path. We are also interested in hearing any advice and insights that you may have for some of us that are about to embark on professional journeys of our own.
Okay, thank you. Glad to be
Jack.
here.
Absolutely, we are so excited. Jack, you want to start us off with the first question?
Most definitely. My name is Jack Dunning. I am a sophomore here at the Capstone studying computer science, finance, and economics. Mr. Culpepper, the question I had for you was, your bio mentions many roles that you've had both internationally and domestically. Could you elaborate on how you obtained some of those international positions, where you went, and what suggestions you have for someone who wants to start their career internationally?
Well, I think first of all, I would say if you really have a desire to be an international business leader, you need to pick a company that has international operations. So that's where I ended up, or how I ended up. And when I joined Shell coming out of college, I had no idea. Actually, I joined Shell Oil Company in the United States, which I didn't realize it was affiliated with Royal Dutch Shell, which is, or at the time was one of the largest companies in the world. And as my career progressed, probably about the midpoint of my career, you've all in your books, you probably take globalization for granted. Your studies would talk about the global nature of business these days. It wasn't necessarily true for the first half of my career. It was more of a U.S. focused type business I was associated with. And then Royal Dutch Shell decided to press the button like everyone else was and try to figure out how to run their company globally. So I suddenly found myself in a global company with expectations that if you wanted to continue to rise in leadership positions, you had no choice really but to make yourself available for international assignments, because that was one of the things Shell valued very much. Was senior leaders had to work outside their home country. They had to have cultural and language experiences different than their own. That was part of the belief system there. So, I found myself mid-career either having to make a choice to get on that wagon and ride it and go overseas, or leave Shell and go do something else. And I chose the first option to move to the Netherlands. Had a number of positions there while I was there. Then I came back home, finished the last part of my career here back in the States. So I'll stop there. Be happy to take off on any of those tangents you want to learn a little bit more about it. But it's more of a norm these days if you go to work for a big company than it was when I started out. But I think it's good if you have that sort of mindset. But you got to find somebody that also values spending the money to develop its talent in that fashion. And that doesn't mean everybody in a company gets to go do an international assignment. It's typically people that are getting groomed for senior leadership roles. So anyway, I'll pause there for a minute.
Thank you, Bruce, or Mr. Culpepper. I think that Noel's got.
Call me Bruce, yeah.
I think that Noel's got a kind of an extension off of that might have to do with moving from a town in Alabama into a role in another.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. My name is Noelle Fall. I'm a junior here at the University of Alabama studying marketing and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the question that I have for you is, in what ways did being from a small Alabama town shape who you are, and what advantages, if any, have you experienced from your heritage?
Well, that's an interesting question. So I grew up in a very small town as an only child, lived out in the country. So I would not define myself as very worldly when I got to the university, and certainly not that worldly when I graduated. I think I had only been on an airplane once before I went on interviews to find a job coming out of the university. So I'm sure most of you have had an airplane flight or two by now. So anyway, I was not in any way prepared for the big wide world of what I was about to get involved in, but I think that helped me in the long run because I had a built-in curiosity to learn. You know, I was sort of fascinated by what was out there that I could go take advantage of and better myself. And I think that natural curiosity and thirst to learn helped me in the end because I kind of had an underdog mentality that I didn't necessarily have all the right, you know, compared to my peers who, you know, I felt were much better educated and much more worldly and had a much wider field of view than I did. But I used that as a kind of my internal drive, I guess, to play catch up and learn all I could and do all I could and make sure I was standing at the front of the line when somebody said they needed something taken care of. So, and I probably had a built-in desire to want to be a leader. I did play sports in high school. I got hurt and couldn't play college ball, but that learning experience from being in athletics and being on a sports team probably is what, you know, spawned my leadership desire. I guess I had a deep desire to want to be a leader because of some of the experiences I had there, and I kind of carried that over into the working world, I suppose, and it did help me in the end, you know. But it was more of a, you know, like I said, I knew I didn't have certain things I wanted to learn as much and do as much as I could to play catch up, and I used that to my advantage throughout my whole career.
Thank you, Mr. Culpepper. I really liked what you said about being from a small town and really not being too worldly. A lot of students right now can relate to that, especially in the pandemic.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm from a small town in Mississippi, so I'm on the same page with you. That's really inspiring to know that you don't have to come from a really big city or know a lot of people. Our next question for you, Mr. Culpepper, is work-life balance. So especially around COVID right now, it seems to be a big topic of discussion. How have you balanced your career with your home life, and what advice do you have for us as we enter the workforce?
Yeah, and this is one I wanted to talk to you guys about a little bit because I see it, whether it's with you or other things I do with the university, when I've come down to talk, it seems to be at the forefront of everyone's worry list. So let me just give you my take on it. Then I'd like you to tell me what causes you to worry about it so much, because I like to try to understand it and help you with it. But I think, you know, balance is different for everybody. And when I went to work, quite frankly, this was a foreign concept. You know, there was no such thing as balance. It was work, you know, and your leaders expected you to work and expected you to work hard, but they also expected you to play hard. You know, in my case, I went away from home. I started out in New Orleans, and my work life and my family life were one and the same because, you know, I was fortunate to hire on at a time when they brought in 30 or 40 other kids, you know, engineers and business people. So we had natural networks of kids that hung out. We weren't kids, we were adults, but we were still kids, you know, that worked hard. And after work, we would order a keg of beer. You can't do this in this day and era, but on company property, we'd order a keg of beer and play volleyball till 9 o'clock at night. And then, you know, those kind of things kind of blended together. So anyway, it wasn't something that anybody worried about or talked about. As I got more into the middle of my career, you know, that becomes more of an issue when you start getting married and having kids. And I still worked hard, and I was fortunate enough that I started moving pretty fast through the leadership ranks. So I had big jobs, responsible jobs, but my way to manage that was, you know, I worked hard during the week. You know, I kind of had a philosophy that, you know, from Monday through Friday, and I had to travel quite a bit. I might not be home, but I'm going to be home on the weekend. So I sort of gave up golf and hunting and fishing and other things I like to do for about 20 years, you know, while I was trying to raise my kids and be around for my wife to help out on things I needed to help out with. And so what I would say is I think everybody finds their own balance, and it's partly a function of what do you want to do and what do you want to be. Um, and I think it'll be much easier for you folks because this is much more of a transparent, out in the open conversation these days than it was when I was coming through. You know, this was part of the subculture back in those days that, you know, he or she who was willing to make sacrifices, work longest, work the hardest, you know, you did get ahead if you were able to do that. And of course that comes up if you're a female and are trying to raise kids and you don't feel like you can do all the things that the males can do. But I think the good news is, culturally companies have progressed and put in policies and mainly put in, frameworks that allow this to be talked about and discussed, and, people figure it out, so what I would say to you is your career, think about it as a marathon. I know it sounds depressing as hell when I say what I'm about to say, but y'all probably ought to have a 40-year working life frame in your head, because when I hired on, it was more like 30, because retirement age was viewed at 62 or whatever. But, the government's trying to force you to work until you're 75, or they really want to keep you working and paying taxes till you die is what really is trying to happen. And that's not good, but, just don't worry about that right now, but think about it as a marathon. So I'm not a marathon runner, but most of a marathon is a measured pace. People are running their time and running it within their capability. But if you want to win a marathon, in some places you're gonna have to sprint. You'll probably have to do some things if you want to be, somebody climbs the ladder of leadership in a company, wherever you go. Sometimes you have to do some things that are not comfortable. You have to make some temporary short-term sacrifices. And I would encourage you just to embrace that, think through that, don't run away from it. And selecting a company, I'd look for companies that have stated core values around work-family balance. Most of the progressive companies these days, this is a value proposition for them. They're going to talk to you about, vacations and holidays and, maternity leave and, whatever the word is for when the husband takes off, paternity leave. All that stuff wasn't there when I was there. So I think you should not be so worried about it that you let it close off options in your search for employment and employment opportunities. Use it as a, it's in the background. Everybody worries about it. You shouldn't feel bad because you think about it, you worry about it. Just don't let it control your life, and don't get so preoccupied with it in your interviews that it sounds like you're more interested in being off than being at work. It would be, I guess, my advice to you. But do in the back of your mind, screen for that. Think about that when you're talking to people about what their philosophies, what their values are, because it'll all work out. The main thing is you need to get a job, get in a company you like, and get in a place where you can do what you like to do. And then it'll sort itself out as you go through life and you go through your career.
Absolutely. I love that analogy, comparing it to a marathon. And I grew up with the work hard, play hard motto as well. So I'm very familiar with that. But I really enjoy you saying, write down your priorities, really look at the company and compare it to your priorities for sure.
Is it a big topic of concern and discussion for all of you? What causes it to be? What do you worry about?
I personally just worry about it going into the workforce, especially hopefully post-COVID, since I'm a junior, but still on the cusp of it. Just like you said, being a woman, trying to maybe start a family, trying to do all these things at once and having, a set of expectations from somebody and a set of expectations for yourself and trying to balance that's difficult sometimes.
Yeah. I think the best advice I could give you, one, don't worry about it. It'll sort itself out. Any company that hires you, they need your help. Okay. They're hiring you because they need you. There's a framework that you may have been exposed to in college, but if not, you'll get exposed to it somewhere, called the commitment conversation. You ever heard of that? If you haven't,
Yes,
Google it. It's a very simple deal, which, I used in Shell over the years to work on culture and work on things like this, where you can have a conversation with your boss openly about this kind of stuff. And I think the good news for all of you is that, like I said, it's going to be in people's minds and they're worried about it more so than they were. So there's ways to manage it. And people will manage it and do manage it. But, if you're ever feeling like you're in a pinch and you can't manage it all, you certainly want to go talk to somebody about it. And usually there's flexibility in the system you don't know about. You just got to go say, hey, I'm having a problem, and, life happens, stuff happens that none of us can predict, but you'll be able to figure it out. I bet you. And so I wouldn't worry too much about it. People are, companies are looking for people that can solve problems, and there's many ways to solve problems. This COVID thing, I'm glad you mentioned it. I do worry as a, retired executive, kind of looking at what's happened with everybody working from home. I would tell you to certainly early in your career, resist the temptation to say, well, I can just work from home. Because I don't believe you don't get developed. You don't learn how to deal with other people. You don't learn how to, the informal part of culture, the unwritten rules that you won't see in a handbook, you won't see in any kind of document, are the things you figure out when you go to the office. Can't figure that out sitting at home on your computer. That's nothing against working from home occasionally, and have to work from home if they won't let you come to the office. But I think I'm worried that some of these companies will say, well, we can save all this money by getting rid of all of our offices. Now all of our staff will just work from home. Well, I'm not sure that's the company I'd want to work for. Certainly not early in my career. I think you need to be around other professionals. That's how knowledge gets transferred, not over the computer. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on that one. But happy to talk about this. I guess what I'd say on the work-family balance, I was fortunate. I went from, over my 38 years, it went from being we don't care about, they wouldn't have said it this way, but there was nothing that gave you any sense anybody was worried about your balance. They were worried about your work. To toward the end, very worried about how do we make sure people know that we care about them, and people did care about me. I mean, don't get me wrong. I had bosses over the years that without having all these policy frameworks. You work for a good company. You work for leaders who have the right personal and leadership values. They're going to make sure you don't burn out. They don't need you. They don't need you to burn out. They don't need you to quit. If you're doing your job, they want you to stay. So they're going to do what they can to make sure your life gets managed in a way that you want to stay at work, and you have a way through the difficult periods when you're raising kids and having kids and sick parents or whatever it may be. And I'll talk a little bit about that on one of your other questions. So, all right, I'll shut up.
No, that was great. Thank you. And I definitely agree with COVID. It sometimes makes that work-life balance even more meshy. They overlap sometimes. You have work and life on top of each other. So that's definitely something to consider.
Exactly.
So I think that this is the question you were just referring to, that you're going to touch on some of the hardships. You talked about whether it be moving internationally, being from a small town in Alabama, and then going into the big city, or whether it be balancing work life and your family. You faced a lot of kind of uphill challenges throughout your career. What has been the most difficult decision that you have made? What made it difficult? And what are the effects that this decision had on you in your life?
Yeah, probably. I'll tell you a little story, and then it leads itself into this other one. But being from a small town, being an only child, and my mother had rheumatic fever as a child, and pretty much, had me believing that this would be her last days and her last year anytime. So she had a hell of a time with her only son, leaving North Alabama and moving away to somewhere else. She lived till she was 93, by the way. But anyway, so Dr. Lena Pruitt, y'all ever heard of Dr. Lena Pruitt? Well, you go, it's one of your assignments after this little deal. None of you are studying HR. Well, go look up Dr. Lena Pruitt. So she was the head of the department of the business school HR program when I was there. And I had been invited on an interview with Kaiser Aluminum out in San Francisco. And I was worried, and I was the head of the, I think it was called ASPA at the time, American Society for Personnel Administration. It's been changed to SHRM now. You've heard about human resource management. But anyway, worrying about if I took that job, how far away from home it was, and all the stuff that went with that, And Dr. Pruitt called me in one day. She said, that's why they make airplanes. She said, they fly a flight from San Francisco to Atlanta every day. If you need to get home to check on your mom and daddy, you can do that, So anyway, I went off and did what I did in Shell, had a good run. So 20 years into my career, this one I referred to earlier. I was pretty much told, if you want to stay with the company, you want to keep rising in leadership ranks, you need to take this job in the Netherlands. My mom and dad were in failing health at the time. And they were probably on the cusp of needing to be put somewhere that somebody could help look after them a little bit. So that was probably the most difficult period of my career, from trying to figure out how to do the right thing as an only child that my mom and dad depended on. And I'm about to load up my family and all my belongings and head on a 12-hour or 10-hour airplane ride to the Netherlands. We did that. I don't regret I did that. It forced some issues later on. Mother and daddy both did have failing health, and I get a call. I'm in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia at a leadership conference. And I get a call that basically says my mom may not make it till I get here. And long story short, she did make it. Had open heart surgery at 82 or 85 or something like that. Still lived to be 90, almost 95. But those kind of things are tough, and I'm not going to, say it wasn't hard. It took a little bit of a toll on me psychologically, just because of how I had, my upbringing, and being, whoever said they were from a small country town, I don't know if you can be from a city or a country, but, country town, but family's important. And particularly, in my era of, your kids are supposed to take care of your parents kind of thing. That was a pretty tough one. But the benefit that I and my family got from us picking up roots and moving, my kids were, at the time, my daughter was headed into the 9th grade and my son headed into 6th or 7th grade, I guess. So, pretty easy on my daughter, only because she had the mindset to want to go overseas. Otherwise, that could have been, some of you might think about what your mentality would have been if your parents told you when you're about ready to be a freshman in high school at a place you've been for 10 years, I'm getting ready to pull you out and send you to some foreign damn country. You might have said, I don't want to do that. But fortunately, my daughter I've been grooming her a little bit to say this could be possible. She had the right mindset. I think both of them would say, certainly my daughter would say, best experience that I've ever had, and my son maybe a little less on the how great it was, but because we brought him back to the States and stuck him back into high school in a public school in Houston as he was headed into the 9th grade. That probably wasn't smart. But anyway, I'm rambling a bit, but I think it's helpful to think about what are you worrying about? What are your challenges? If you reel your clock forward 20 years, you're worrying about. And what I would say to you is there's ways to manage all these things so that you respect your elders, you take care of whatever needs to be taken care of. And it all gets back to, what do you want to do? What do you want to be? Where do you want to go? If you really value international experience, somewhere along the way, these kind of things are going to happen. That'd be the other thing I'd tell you, for any of you that really want to work for an international company. If you get a chance, don't wait till you're like me, 45 years old and in the middle of your career and in the middle of life and having some of these bigger issues pile up on you. Go early if you can, get that ticket punched. And I could have, if I'd have been a little more worldly about what was happening, what I should have done, but I wouldn't trade what happened to me. As I ended up at a time where I ran some, really big stuff, which was sometimes I'd walk around the streets of The Hague where I lived and pinch myself and say, is this really true? That I'm doing this, little boy from Fife, Alabama. So anyway, that was my bigger one. But there's a lot of things that transfer from, these personal dilemmas that we run across into the working world, particularly, in terms of the people that are now working for you and were working for me, who were also struggling with similar stuff. So, you can actually help them from your leadership perspective by having lived through it yourself. So long-winded answer, but sorry, but it's that's one that I still have some emotional attachment to,
Thank you for letting us learn a little bit more about your personal life. That really means a lot to us that we get to hear that.
But look up Dr. Pruitt. I'm not going to tell you all about her, but she was for Werner von Braun. Do you know who he was? Come on, you got to know who he was. He was the guy he's the one that started the space program, figured out how to go to the moon. And I think Dr. Pruitt's still alive, still lives in Tuscaloosa.
Well, thank you for saying all of that. I really related to you being from Alabama, a small town here, and moving out or getting an opportunity on the West Coast. I actually just got an internship offer out in San Francisco. So I've been going through the same struggle of finding that balance and deciding if I'm making the right decision by potentially moving all the way out there. But with that said, our last question for you today is, what is an important lesson you learned on your path to leadership?
Oh, I don't know. You got about a half a day. I would say, let me go back to what I've said already. I think not everybody wants to be a leader. And I kind of thought I did. I didn't know what that meant, but I had some inner desire that made me want to be in leadership roles, and I would volunteer to do things, at a pretty early age that, I liked the feeling of being in charge. And I don't know why. I mean, not everybody wants that, because that comes with responsibilities. You can't be a leader and just, get your name in the headlines and on the org chart. You got to actually figure out what it means to be a leader. So I'll tell you a little bit of a story. I wanted to be a leader from the very beginning of my career. Leadership, I wasn't, you didn't know how to quite be a leader, but I think you kind of knew in Shell pretty early on, if you want to be viewed well by the company, you need to take care of your job, take care of your business, do your job that they ask you to do and do it well. So my story was about pretty quickly figuring out what I've said earlier. The bosses that I worked for were very happy to have me take things off of their plate. And so they would load me up to the point that, I think they tried to break me a number of times. They'd give me so much work, but I would continue to show that I had the capacity and the willingness to crank it out, And so that was probably the first lesson in leadership. On the path to leadership, you first got to break out of the pack. If you want to be a leader, you're not going to get hired necessarily. You may get hired into a leadership development program or a management trainee program, depending on what kind of company you go to work for. But if you go to a big company like Shell or Chevron or AT&T or United Airlines or whatever, you're probably going to just be one of the crop of kids they bring in. And over time, they're going to start trying to figure out through their own internal performance management systems who has the ability and who has the desires and the attributes to separate themselves from the pack and be put into a more of a leadership track. So, I figured that out in Shell without really knowing formally what that meant. I just knew that it looked like that I was working hard. I was getting we didn't have bonuses back in those days. It was before the era of variable pay, but whenever it came time to hand out money, I knew I was getting, rated and rewarded among the top. And so, that was pretty obvious to me in the first 2 or 3 years. And as I started to get promoted, one of the things that also occurred to me is that I hired on with 20 or 30 other people in human resources, and they would bring us together periodically to do, training courses and things they were trying to teach all of us together. There were certain people in that group that I knew were sitting there with their spreadsheets, and every time somebody would get promoted, they would look back and see, how long have I been here? When did I last get promoted? That person's getting promoted higher than me or faster than me or whatever. So there was a bunch of people that just were consumed by what was happening to everybody else around them, and not worrying too much about their jobs and performing well. They're worried about looking good and sounding good, but not necessarily doing good. So I tell you that only to say, in this day and age where you guys, I know, are consumed by Facebook and everybody is in your face about what the hell they're doing. It may look better than what you're doing. Don't let that carry over into your work life and be consumed by what everybody else is doing. Be consumed by, if I have another sports analogy, probably golf is the good analogy here. You're playing golf. Yeah, you're playing with 4 other people on your, or 3 other people, but you're really playing against that little ball and the scorecard. You know, that's your motivation, is to do whatever they're asking you to do it well. Sometimes some other people may move ahead of you, and there may be good reasons for that. It may be because they got bigger plans for you and you just don't know about it yet. So anyway, be mindful of things like that, and don't be consumed by, you know, all the noise. There's a lot of noise in a big company. Be consumed by doing a good job and doing it the right way. And then I would say, as my story continues, you know, I did well at that early days, mainly, but I was an individual contributor and I was just doing my work. And then about 7 years in or so, it became obvious to me that they were pushing me a little faster than some other folks. And I think at the ripe age of 28 or 29, I got sent to, well, I had gone from New Orleans to, I had two different jobs in New Orleans. And then I went to Houston and did some pretty big stuff for a young person. And then I got sent to Seawarren, New Jersey as a plant HR manager, right about the time I was either 29 or 30, which was pretty cool, scary as hell, because I was sent out there to a very challenging location. There were some pretty challenging union issues in that part of the world, and there were some pretty challenging people running around. But anyhow, that was my first big leadership role, if you will. And what I realized is, just because they now make you a manager and on the org chart you're technically a leader, that doesn't mean anything. You know, you have to earn your stripes. You have to earn the respect of the people that are now working for you. So that was obvious there, but that really wasn't much of a challenge in that first little job. I was only there 2 years. And then I woke up one day and got a call, and they told me they were taking me out of human resources, moving me to Chicago to be the regional manager over our products distribution business. So in that role, I had a fleet of trucks, you know, the big transport trucks that deliver gasoline to the stations. I had 15 or 20 terminals. So these are the tank farms you see, you know, near airports or different places where gasoline gets stored before they put it in that truck and take it out to your gas station. And I had a couple of dimensions in that job. First of all, most of the people that worked for me looked like my dad. They were somewhere between 50 and 60 years old, and I could have been their son. So, and then I had a couple people that worked for me that thought they were going to be me. And they thought they should have had the job, and maybe they should have, but they didn't get it, and I got it. So early on, I had to learn some pretty important stuff. That one, you need to figure out, you know, who's with you and who's not with you. And if they're not with you, you got to figure out how to either earn their commitment, get them on board with you, or you need to move them on down the road to somewhere else. And sometimes that means moving them out of the company. So that may sound harsh, but you know, as a leader, you better figure out who's on your team that's helping you pull the boat in the right direction, because otherwise they're dropping anchor and they're going to pull you down with it. But the more important piece to me was earning the respect and credibility of those company elders that I told you about, that had been there for 30 years and had all the wisdom, had all the experience. They had the ability to either make me look like I was good, or basically, you know, make me look like a little pipsqueak. So, you know, I've spent lots of time out in the field with those folks, learning what they knew, and working with them to try to help them have a better job and a better life, and you know, fight for them to get, you know, money to do what they need to do in their plants and in their workforces. And that was probably one of the defining early jobs that I had, which I demonstrated the ability to basically, I would say, relate from, you know, the shop floor to the boardroom. And back to my early upbringing, you know, I think my small town, you know, growing up in the country and being a farm boy, and my dad was sort of a Mr. Fix It, you know, I was not ashamed to get out and get my hands dirty had lived with my hands dirty. I knew how to do things and, look just as good in a pair of coveralls or as I did with my suit and tie on. So those kind of things, you got to figure out what your culture is, what kind of company you're working for. But, if you want to be in leadership, it's not just as simple as you get promoted and you show up on the org chart. That's all great. That's the first thing that has to happen. You got to have enough, got to have somebody that thinks enough of you to do that for you. But then you got to figure out how to develop followership and how to create a culture and how to create a performance mindset, create a team that actually does what you need them to do. And that's the fun work of leadership. Sometimes it's the hard work of leadership. I mean, sometimes you have to do some things that are not pleasant, but you got to figure out, is it going to be me or them, I'm don't hope you don't get the impression I'm trigger happy at trying to exit people from the company. That's always a last resort. But as a leader, you got to be willing to make sure you get the right people around you. And sometimes, you have to help people figure out that there's someplace else for them, either in the company or elsewhere. But that always starts with, good conversations and trying to get people on board with you, which you can do. So anyway, that's probably the biggest thing that I dealt with and learned pretty early on that carried me through. And you could extend that story. I show up in the Netherlands as the head of human resources for global exploration and production. So, that's another dimension of leadership that, if you're going to be in a big company and want to be a global leader, you got to figure out how you're going to deal with all that. And it's you have to have a mindset of authenticity. I'd say I didn't use that word, but I think if you had one word that you wanted to put on me over my career that worked well, I was authentic. I didn't. You got to modulate, you got to flex your style and your language and all that a little bit, but you can't try to become someone you're not. You got to operate from your core values and from your set of principles. And my accent's not as pronounced as it was when I grew up in Fife, but it still has a little bit of a country twang, and that served me well, and I have plenty of barnyard analogies that I used to use in my global leadership team, to the point I've forgotten most of them. And some people wanted to write a book on me at one point. I should have let them, because I probably forgot most of it. But, you got to figure out, what your authenticity is, and people will respect that and love that, as you go through your leadership career. But you also got to operate from a point of view of, genuine respect and curiosity for the other people. I had to go spend time in the Middle East and in Africa and other places to even though people, where it's most dangerous, I think, is where they speak. You can understand their language. They speak English, but their meaning of what they're saying may be very different than your meaning of it. So you got to take time to understand where they're coming from and how to translate that into whatever it is you're trying to work on, so that people do respect you and they want to work for you. Unfortunately, I was good enough at that to have a pretty good following over the years, and still have many great relationships from around the world because of that.
Awesome. I loved that answer. I love the authenticity. I definitely think that rings true with a lot of us having to deal with leadership roles right now, for sure, especially with COVID. That's all we have time for, Mr. Culpepper. Thank you so much for joining us. We could talk all day. Your advice and insights have given us a lot to think about. I know our students will enjoy listening to your lecture as much as we have. We can't wait to share this with them. We hope you have a great day, and we hope to see you on campus soon. But from all of us Culverhouse, roll Tide.
Thank you. Roll Tide.